What does it mean that we live in a secular age or a secular society? And more importantly, the question I want to bring to the table this morning is, what does it mean to live there? What is the kind of posture that we should take as we inhabit a secular age? Should we be manning our battle stations in defensive posture, rebuilding the fortresses? Or counterintuitively, could there actually be an opportunity in a secular society, in this cultural moment in which we find ourselves, for a new impact that the gospel can make in our contemporary moment? And so what I want to think about with you this morning is, I think it first requires understanding what we mean when we talk about the secularism, and a secular age. And you'll forgive me, I'm waiting for my slides to come up. There we go, my fault. I usually use chalk is the technology that I am most familiar with. I want to suggest that the secular isn't what you think. There are many ways, it's a slippery term, it's used in all kinds of different ways, and usually the way we use the term is it refers to a view or institution or maybe sometimes a person that we call secular, and what we mean is that it's allegedly neutral, unbiased, objective, capital R, rational, and above all, and because of that, a-religious. So the word secular, as we use it, especially in our contemporary context and in modernity, has this sense of the a-religious neutrality of a kind of rational perspective. If that's the working definition of secular, then secularism is the kind of doctrine or dogmatic requirement that says our public squares, our public discourse has to be governed by rules that are themselves allegedly neutral, unbiased, objective, scientific, capital R, rational, and above all, a-religious. So that perspective is now supposed to govern our public sphere and our political discourse and our institutions. And then there's a third theme that goes along with this, which is, so you've got a definition of the secular, you've got secularism as a sort of dogmatic stance, and then the secularization thesis or secularization theory was this predictive theory that said that we should expect a society that is advancing in technology, advancing in scientific knowledge, becoming increasingly capitalist, will become diminishingly religious and therefore secularized. Now, here's the problem with all three of those framings of the secular. The first, that there is a neutral, unbiased, objective, capital R, rational standpoint, is a myth. And one of the most important developments in philosophy over the past 30 to 40 years has been the round debunking of that entire myth of a secular standpoint, and not just from religious voices. But the second problem with this kind of secular or secularist take on our contemporary moment is that it doesn't make sense of the complexity of the age in which we find ourselves. Secularism does not do justice to the features of the secular age in which we find ourselves. And so both of these have come under challenge. So what I want us to do is reframe and re-understand what it means to be secular. And my suggestion is that this actually will give us a more nuanced, complex understanding of the world in which we find ourselves. I think we have an opportunity to listen carefully to our contemporary cultural moment, and we will be surprised to hear persistent, enduring longings for transcendence and fullness that the new atheists would never, ever, ever expect. My suggestion is that a secularist account of our contemporary age doesn't do justice to the peculiar longing and hungers that still characterize a secular age. Listen for the cracks in the secular. Let me give you a couple of examples. My first example is one of my favorites. It's a British novelist named Julian Barnes, who is one of the sort of greats of his generation. Julian Barnes is a poster child for a kind of secularized society. He will be the first to tell you he never grew up in the church, has never even been to religious services, has no religious experience whatsoever. And yet in 2008, when he published a memoir, powerful memoir called Nothing to Be Frightened Of, time and time again, he said this: I don't believe in God, but I miss him. I don't believe in God, but I miss him. Friends, I want to suggest that dynamic, the messy complexity of that curious dynamic, says more about what it is to live in a secular society than anything Richard Dawkins has ever claimed. And so there's a complexity of this weird sort of enduring hunger and longing and sense of loss that you will hear if you have ears to hear. Let me get one other example that comes to mind. We were listening to the Postal Service in our room before we came here. Listen to popular music lyrics, and I would suggest pretty much anything that Ben Gibbard has ever written fits here. On the Postal Service album, there's a song called Clark Gable in which you will hear this lyric. I won't sing it at you. I want so badly to believe that there is truth and love is real. And I want life in every word to the extent that it's absurd. Right? Do you hear the openness and hunger, maybe nostalgia, maybe melancholy, but an interesting longing? I think the question that we need to ask ourselves if you want to understand a secular age is, why does it still seem haunted? What's happening here? Why didn't secularization theory expect this? Now, does this mean that we're not secular? Does this mean that, oh no, it's not a secular society? No, what it means is we have to redefine the term secular. And so let's not equate a secular society with one that is characterized pervasively by unbelief. It's not a prediction of unbelief. Instead, a secular society is a society in which we all experience the contestability of our belief. A shift to a secular society is a shift to a society in which the plausibility conditions have changed. What we mean by that is that what's believable has changed. And what that feels like is to inhabit a society in which on your street you know that there are people who don't believe what you believe. And they're good people, and they're smart people, and you all realize that what you believe can't be taken to be axiomatic and the default for a society anymore. We have to face up to what Charles Taylor calls this fragilization of our belief, right? We realize that our beliefs are contested and contestable. And that means everybody in a secular age is going to experience what Taylor calls this cross-pressure experience. We're going to feel tugged and pushed and pulled and pressed by alternative rival stories of who we are and what we're for. Now, I think there are very important implications of that. The first is an implication for the church, which is the church has to be honest that doubt is not the enemy of faith, it is a companion of faith. We are all Thomas now in a secular society. And I think if the church doesn't have the courage to be honest about that, then a rising generation who feels this cross-pressure is going to feel like we are hiding something. But secondly, and this is the opportunity, if in a secular society, in a secular age where belief is contested, if believers are subject to this temptation to doubt, but everybody is cross-pressured, then that means that unbelievers are tempted to believe. The doubter's doubt is faith. And there is an opening and an opportunity here. And a third implication that I want us to take seriously is it also means that in some ways, secularism, dogmatic, aggressive, doctrinaire secularism, does not own up to the contestability of its own belief. In some unique way, secularism is actually insufficiently secular. And I think that there's a reason why that secularism becomes so dogmatic and so aggressive is precisely because the emperor will protest how beautiful his raiments are precisely when the doubt sets in. That the vehemence of an aggressive secularist stance might itself be an interesting symptom of the doubts about it. And so I want us again to see this as an opening, as a crack in the secular that shows us an interesting opportunity. Now, there is a second feature that characterizes a secular age that I think we have to take seriously, and it's the dynamics of disenchantment. And here is where I think the church needs to do some of its own stock taking. To live in a secular age is to live in a sort of disenchanted world in which the cosmos has been flattened and we are enclosed in what Charles Taylor calls the immanent frame. What happens is we've sort of unhooked the cosmos from its creator. And in many ways, we have to be honest that the Protestant Reformation was one of the engines that drove this disenchantment. That perhaps unintentionally, all kinds of aspects of the fallout from the Reformation kind of flattened the world, left us with the sterility of a naturalism, and it evacuated the cosmos of mystery and transcendence. And here's the problem. It did the same thing to Christianity. It flattened Christianity. It enclosed us in this kind of claustrophobic lecture hall. The church becomes this box where brains on a stick receive information in messages. And we flatten Christianity in a dynamic that Taylor calls excarnation. We disembodied it. It became less communal, less material, less sacramental. This is where another opportunity presents itself. Because when our neighbors who are experiencing the flatness and deposity and poverty of a flattened, disenchanted world, they are not going to be attracted to another box. They're not going to be attracted by another version of a sort of flattened, disenchanted universe. What they'll be attracted to is precisely an enchanted Christianity. So in You Are What You Love, what I argue is that I think the future of the church is ancient. And that in a secular age, what we actually have is an opportunity for the church to recover its incarnate, embodied, liturgical, practiced, sacramental, enchanted spirituality, which will be precisely the kind of Christianity that has a draw and a pull on those who are feeling a haunting. What might stop people short is not another version of a TED Talk. What's going to haunt them, what's going to hook them, is going to be religious communities that have punched skylights in our brass heaven and brings them into an embodied, communal, enchanted space where all of a sudden they realize that the cosmos is charged with the grandeur and glory of God. There's this fantastic painting by El Greco that hangs in the Metropolitan Museum in Manhattan. It's called The Vision of St. John, and it's based on the passage in Revelation chapter 6 about the unleashing of the fifth seal. This painting, you would never guess it, was actually completed in 1614. And yet it looks like the kind of thing that could have been painted in France in 1920. It's an incredible work in which you see this powerful biblical vision of the martyrs who bore faithful witness are now given white robes, while John looks heavenward towards the epiphany of the Lamb. But here's the weird thing about, if you go see this at the Met, the canvas that you see is actually a fragment. In the late 1800s, in the name of improving the work, in fact, they cut off 175 centimeters from the top of the canvas. Almost 5 feet of the painting was lopped off of the top. And in this name of restoration and improvement, what now happens is a kind of parable of a secular age. The exultant arms of John the Revelator reach upward to nothing, to the top of the frame, to the edge of the canvas. The martyrs who seem to be receiving gifts receive them from who? No one. And John seems to praise the non-existent. All of them seem to look for something that is no longer there. well, what if our modernist, secularist projects of improvement and advancement and disenchantment have actually severed us from what makes for a flourishing society? While some might be railing against the myths of what lies beyond the frame, friends, many others might be asking, what's up there? Our calling in a secular age might be less a matter of securing our status and more a matter of bearing witness to what's missing, especially to those who are feeling the claustrophobia of that imminent frame. And we might be surprised at the response. There are cracks in the secular. Some of you, I'm sure, know the Leonard Cohen song, Anthem. Great stanza. Ring the bells that still can ring. Forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. I'm suggesting that our posture in the face of a secular age shouldn't be to rebuild fortresses in fear. We should be the people who are rebuilding cathedrals of hope, which are open, hospitable spaces of welcome that invite people to see what's beyond the frame, what's been left off, the transcendent that has been knocking on the doors of their hearts and haunting them all of this time. Let's be the generation who plant gardens in the cracks of the secular. Thank you.